Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my Twitch stream. My name is Astrology, and I am thrilled to have you here tonight for a very interesting chart of a very famous person. This is the astrological chart of Taylor Swift. And obviously, this is someone who's had a tremendous impact on the entire culture of the world. I mean, she's someone who is absolutely incredible for so many reasons. She's an amazing singer. She's an amazing songwriter. She also has excellent business acumen, which we will refer to in a little while. And she's someone that is well respected in the musical community. So I'm glad you joined me for the chart tonight. One of the things that I did want to start off by talking about is that obviously, as you can see on this chart, that Ms. Swift does actually have a birth time. So 5:17 a.m. is the birth time. Now, if you are interested in astrology and you have looked up this chart before, you may have seen a different time. There are actually two times that are floating around out there for Taylor's birth time. What I want to tell you is that if you see the other one, which I think is 8:36 a.m., that one is not considered to be correct. Astrologers believe that this is the one that is correct, that is the most accurate. So that's why I'm going to be using this one and not the 8:36 time. But I did want to warn you there is another chart, another chart time floating out there somewhere. So if you see it, don't be alarmed. But for tonight, we're going to be looking at the 5:17 a.m. Birth time, as it is considered by astrologers to be the most accurate. Okay. So as we normally do, we're going to start with our rising sign. We're going to check out the elemental balance, and we're going to go through the chart as usual. So let's do that. Okay, so we have a rising Scorpio chart. Rising Scorpio people have an intensity about them. Intensity is a great word for Scorpio. It's probably the best description I've ever had of a Scorpio, of the sign of Scorpio generally. I say they, but we, because I'm a Scorpio sun, we pretty much are intense about everything. When you have Scorpio rising, you look at the world through the eyes of Scorpio. So it means that you have a very strong moral code. You likely are going to seek out intense experiences. You're going to want your life to be passionate and interesting. And the things that you are going to show an interest in are things that you're going to dig deep into. Scorpio doesn't do surface level anything, folks. Basically, for people with lots of Scorpio placements, either we are all in or we're not at all. And I find in my own life that happens quite often. There are certain things like astrology and tarot, for example, that I'm very into, but a lot of the other metaphysical arts I know very little about and actually don't always care that much about. I know enough. As the former head high priest of a Wiccan community, you learn certain things, and there are definitely pieces of information that you want to have to help people, but my expertise is clearly in two areas in the metaphysical world, and that's astrology and tarot, and that's by choice. Okay, so we tend to look at the world in a very deep way, a very deep, intense way, and Taylor Swift is no exception to this. Now, what makes this chart very interesting already and can give you the idea of the strength of this chart is by looking at the ruling planets. Now, I say ruling planets plural because Scorpio actually has two ruling planets. In the modern world, the ruler is Pluto. So I'll highlight Pluto. And as you probably know, astrologers look at the world of generations by the sign that Pluto is in when the person was born. And so you can often tell what's going on with someone generationally just by looking at their Pluto sign. In this case, Ms. Swift is actually part of the Pluto and Scorpio generation. When we have Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto is in the strongest sign it can be in. And so she has a rising sign ruler that is extremely powerful. So we already know that we have an intense person because we've got Scorpio rising. But what makes it even deeper and more passionate about how they see the world is they have Pluto and Scorpio ruling it. Now, we also have people who are known as classical astrologers. And classical astrologers will only use the first 7 planets that we discovered as chart rulers. It does not mean they will ignore Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. It's just that they will use what I would call the traditional rulers of the signs. In the ancient world, Scorpio was ruled by the planet Mars. So when you have someone who's a Scorpio rising chart or has a lot of Scorpio in the chart, you definitely want to look at both Pluto and Mars to see what's going on with both. If it couldn't get more obvious, I would be surprised, because we also have an extremely strong Mars in this chart right here. And it is sitting right on the rising sign. And Mars is also in Scorpio. So no matter how you slice it, folks, this is going to be a very strong chart already. We've got Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto in Scorpio, ruling the chart, and its co-ruler Mars in Scorpio sitting right on the ascendant. So you already know that this person's a powerhouse just from this alone. Okay? So we've got that. Now, what is interesting also is that this 12th house is often a place where we see planets in people who are artists, singers, dancers, and creative and sensitive people of all kinds. And Ms. Swift has Pluto there. Again, not a surprise. She's going to have a lot of power in the area of the subconscious mind. And that 12th house is wonderful for anyone who does anything that is sensitive. And that includes people who need to have artistic or creative sensitivity. Okay. So again, we start off with a really good chart ruler, 2 of them actually. Remember that with astrology, the planets are about the cards that you're dealt. So Taylor Swift has already been dealt an outstanding hand already. I mean, we're going to look at the rest of it, but she's already been dealt an outstanding hand, folks. Okay. Now, before we go on, let's look at the elemental balance as usual. So over here we have not 1, but 2 singleton planets, ladies and gentlemen, which means each one of those planets is going to stick out a lot, because each one of them represents the one area of that element in the chart. So we have 1 fire planet in the chart, and it's a heavy hitter because it's the Sun in Sagittarius. This is not only the only Sagittarius placement in the chart, this is the only fire sign placement in the chart. And we have plenty to talk about the Sun. I'll definitely have some more later on to add to this, but we already know the Sun is going to stick out even more than usual. Now, going back to the elemental balance again, we're going to see that we also have, in addition to 1 fire sign, we also have 1 air sign. Once again, the sole representative of the air element in this chart is Venus in Aquarius at 1 Aquarius. Here it is. Venus is a chart that is a planet that's incredibly important for anyone who does artistic work, singers, painters, illustrators, anyone who does work with creative anything, in this case songwriting, for example, and singing, Venus is the planet that is going to really, really help with that. And so we have another reason for Venus to stick out. We will come back to Venus, of course. So we already know from this chart that those two planets, we have the Sun in Sagittarius and we have Venus in Aquarius, that are going to stick out by virtue of the fact that they are the only representatives of their element in the chart. Which means we have 8 planets left, and we have 4 Earth and 4 water planets. Lots of water. This person's incredibly sensitive. This person is emotional. Lots of earth. This person's a hard worker. They potentially have some business savvy. They know how to use, they know how to do logistics. They know how to work their own resources very, very well. And so we see that personality of Taylor Swift already coming out with the information that we have. Now, one other thing I do not want to miss is that we have one other singleton, and I mentioned this a couple of streams ago. But remember that each sign of the zodiac has an element and a quality. Remember, those qualities are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Ms. Swift has one mutable planet in the chart. And if you haven't guessed what it is yet, it is, once again, Sagittarius Sun. So not only is Sagittarius Sun the only fire planet in the chart, it's also the only mutable planet in the chart. Now let's talk about what that means. Mutability is the ability to make changes, the ability to adapt. Mutability is the desire to follow orders instead of the need to take on long-term projects or the need to lead in any way, shape, or form. Again, that doesn't mean that people with a lot of mutable planet placements cannot be good rulers or leaders. It just means that they're more suited for doing discrete tasks instead of leading or being assigned projects that are long-term for which they are responsible. Okay? They're usually better at disparate tasks that they can check off a list and keep going. In this chart, we have one mutable planet. So we already know that Taylor Swift is not someone to be trifled with. This is not a person who's going to wait for other people to call the shots. Okay? We have 6 cardinal planets. Remember that cardinal signs are the signs that begin a season. People who have a heavy cardinal influence, and let's just say it, 60% of Taylor Swift's chart is cardinal planets. When you have this many cardinal planets, you are going to be the one to take charge. You are going to be the one to initiate. You are going to be the one to make the calls for yourself. Okay? This is not the chart of a person who is going to allow other people to make decisions for them. They're going to want to step up and do it. And of course, we also have 3 fixed planets, which gives her some more gravitas and ability to stick to the things that she does. It's not a huge amount of fixed planets. It's about a normal amount, I would say. But it does mean that she's not a leader who just says, I want to start this and not finish it. She actually has the staying power to finish things as well. So again, what I'm setting you up for is a chart that has a tremendous amount going for it. Okay. Let's go back to the sun in Sagittarius. Don't want to miss that. Now, we've already said that the sun in Sagittarius is about people who want to search for the truth. The sun in Sagittarius is people who like to travel, people who want to do road trips, people who don't necessarily want to be tied down to responsibility, people who have a strong desire to grow in their beliefs over their life. The idea that the truth that you seek as a Sagittarius sun person is not the same over the years. It changes over time. So the Sagittarius sun person is always going to be searching for the truth as they see it in that moment, in that part of their life. Okay. Now in this chart, as I mentioned, we have the sun in Sagittarius that is the only fire planet and the only mutable planet in the chart. So we know this is important. It's easy to say, oh, the sun's always important. In some charts, the sun is not as important as you would think. If it gets hidden in one of the cadent houses, the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, or perhaps the 12th house, it's not necessarily as important. Okay, it can't always function as well in those houses. Sometimes if a particular planet is not well integrated into the chart, then it might not have a lot of influence. So let's not assume that the sun is always going to be the be-all and the end-all. He is very important in Western astrology. Don't get me wrong, but he's not always as important as some of the other factors that are going on. In this case, he is the only mutable sign. The sun is the only mutable sign, and the sun is the only fire sign. But more than that, the sun is also unaspected. The sun does not have any connections in this natal chart. No conjunctions, no oppositions, no squares, no 90-degree angles, no 60-degree angles, sextiles, no 120-degree angles. Those are trines. There are none here, which brings the sun even more into focus. When we have the sun unaspected, folks, we call that the maverick. Okay, the sun in whatever sign it's in, if it is unaspected, this is a person who not only marches to the beat of their own drummer, but they're the ones who are completely owning their own space in the world. They don't say, I have to fit in. They say, I am going to create a space where I fit in. That's the power, the maverick power of the unaspected sun. Now, the challenge with an unaspected sun, and I know this one well because I also have an unaspected sun, is that you don't really fit in anywhere. So as you go through life, you find groups and organizations and sets of people, and you feel like you fit, but not always fully. There's always something that's not quite right. For someone who has the sun unaspected, it's important for that person to create the spaces where they will be comfortable and not expect to fit in with a lot of different groups. Okay? Someone with the sun unaspected certainly can be in groups, but a lot of times when we are in a group, people want to put us in charge of said group, which is not always the place we want to be. Even recently, I had the opportunity to head up a group, and I said no. And so it's important for you to understand that when you see an unaspected sun, you have to understand this person is a maverick, and they are creating the spaces and places that are important for them. Okay? All right. And hi, Cozy Curls Astro. Nice to have you aboard. Yes, interesting news about Taylor Swift today. Yeah, I guess I picked a good day for it, huh? In any case. All right. Before I forget, the sun is also in the first house. And when we see the sun in the first house, we actually understand that maverick nature is going to be magnified because that first house is about the ego. So I am convinced that Taylor Swift is very aware of how amazing she is. Again, I say that not necessarily in a negative way, but this is a person likely with a pretty healthy ego, and considering what she's accomplished, I'm not really surprised at all. I would probably have an ego about it too. Okay. All right. Excellent. Yes, apparently Taylor Swift is being sued. I do not know the circumstances yet. I haven't checked it out, but Cozy Curls, I appreciate you bringing that up in the stream. Yeah, maybe we'll have to look at that another day. It would be interesting to pull the chart for that for today and see how it looks up against her natal and see what's going on. All right. In any case, let's continue on. So that's the sun. All right. Let's look at the moon next. The moon is in Cancer in this chart. Now, the moon's favorite sign is Cancer. I really like to use the image of the river for the moon. And when the moon is in Cancer, I want you to consider a river that is very powerful, that has no obstructions, no rocks, no sandbars, just flowing. It's powerful enough that it can sometimes go over its banks a little bit, but it is always moving. When you have the moon in Cancer, you are likely extremely intuitive. You're likely very, very sensitive. A lot of people with the moon in Cancer cry easily when they need to, when it happens, when they become sad or when something hits them. Moon in Cancer people also are very good generally with children. I happen to know someone with the moon in Cancer who works with children, and she is exceptional at it. She seems to know exactly what is happening with them. She uses her intuition in that regard very, very well. But that moon in Cancer sensitivity can also be a drawback, because if the moon in Cancer person allows that moon to run amok, then they can spend a lot of time dealing with emotions that are not necessarily important at that time to deal with. Or they may feel that someone is angry with them because they don't call them. They may make assumptions about how other people feel about them that aren't necessarily true. They might feel easily ignored or easily brushed off. There are lots of different things that could happen, but there could be too much emotion easily with the moon in Cancer. As we look at where it's placed, we notice that it's placed in the 8th house. The 8th house is the helping, healing house. If Taylor Swift had decided not to do music, she likely would have wanted to do something in one of the caring professions. Again, she's very, very sensitive. The 8th house is about helping and healing, but it's also about the unconscious mind. It's also about things like therapy and dealing with very deep emotions from our childhood, from our past. And so I could have definitely seen her consider other careers, including potentially a therapist. Okay? But this can be a challenge to work with, again, because it's so incredibly sensitive. In the past, we've talked about the moon and how in our lives we have to go from moon to sun. Taylor Swift as a child might have been much more shy than she is now. And you're thinking, oh, well, most kids are shy and they become adults and they become less so. True. But with the moon in Cancer, I could see a very shy child here. Again, growing into that sun in Sagittarius in the first house, there would be a lot of work to do with public presence and feeling, understanding what it's like to be the center of attention. And I'm sure she went through quite a few of those times during her life. But so far, I want you to look at something here. We've got 1, 2, 3 planets that are what we call astrologically in rulership. In other words, they are extremely powerful. They are in a sign that the planet rules. When we talk about having a great astrological hand, 30% of her planets so far that we've seen have been in rulership. This makes for an extremely powerful person. Again, we've got Mars in Scorpio, we've got Pluto in Scorpio, and now we're adding the moon in Cancer to it. Okay, so again, a small aside, but let's keep in mind that if you have a lot of powerful planets, you are well poised for the level of success that Taylor Swift has had. Now, as I've said before, you can have all these great planets and still not achieve what you want to achieve if you do not use the energy properly. If you're not living your chart at the appropriate level, you won't get there. Thankfully for us, Taylor Swift appears to be doing that. So she's become very successful and she's worked for it. Okay. All right, next planet coming up is Mercury. So we will take a look here. Okay. We have Mercury in Capricorn. Okay, Mercury, our Chief Communications Officer in Capricorn, which is a leadership sign, but is also a sign that is very careful with how they word things and what they say to people. They can be a little bit tentative. They can be a little bit cautious about how they communicate with others because they don't want to give offense and they want to make sure that they are correct. A Mercury and Capricorn person is not going to open up their mouth unless they're absolutely sure that it's the truth. And so when we're dealing with Mercury and Capricorn, we're dealing with a very serious person on a cerebral level. Now, when it comes to problem solving, long-term problems are going to be a forte for the Mercury and Capricorn person. Shorter-term problems that require immediate solutions, that's not really in the wheelhouse of a Mercury and Capricorn because Capricorn wants more runway to work with, right? They want a little more time. They want more ability to see the whole picture instead of just this one decision. Mercury and Capricorn folks are always looking forward to the future so they can understand the problems not only that are going to happen today, but the ones that are potentially going to happen tomorrow. Okay, so Mercury and Capricorn is in this chart and it's sitting in the second house of money and finances. Now, as you're looking at the second house, and we're going to talk about all the planets, of course, but you've probably noticed that the second house is absolutely packed with planets. Whoops, I circled a little too much. Hold on, let me go back. There are 5 planets in the second house, ladies and gentlemen. When you see a ton of planets in the second house, the potential for financial success, generally speaking, is pretty strong. It can also be that someone is very preoccupied about their own finances, their own debts, their own financial security. And again, the second house, as I've said before, is the house of movable possessions. And so this is a person who likes to have lots of things around. Okay? But we have Mercury there, so what does Taylor Swift know about money and finances? I bet that even though she makes quite a bit of money, I bet she knows exactly what she's doing with it. And you can see that in some of the decisions she's made and in her overall business acumen. She knows what she's doing. Okay. Now, as we look at the second house, we can also, we may as well jump over while we're here, to Jupiter. And I mention that because, as I've said before, when we look at how well a house is going to do, we have to look at the ruling planet of the house. The ruling planet of the second house is Jupiter, because the sign on the cusp is Sagittarius. Okay. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. Exalted is a way of saying the honored guest. When a planet is in a particular sign, the sign of its exaltation, as we say, it attracts things. So in the case of Jupiter, Jupiter in Cancer attracts luck, attracts opportunities, attracts wealth, okay, attracts things that are big. Jupiter wants big. When you have Jupiter in Cancer, you tend to be in the right place at the right time. People seek you out for opportunities, okay? And the idea with this is that when you have 5 planets in the second house and an exalted ruler in Jupiter, I mean, you really can't go wrong with that. That already is a really positive setup for financial success. Okay. All right. So we have that Jupiter ruling the second. So again, we know this person financially is likely going to be a powerhouse, which obviously in her life has turned out to be true. So let's look at Venus next. Venus is another planet that is exceptionally important for not only singers, but artists and dancers and anyone who does a creative field, graphic designers, etc. Earlier we talked about Venus, and let me remind you, Venus is the only planet in this chart in an air sign. So we already know Venus is going to get some attention. We already know this. But what we didn't talk about before, and we'll get there in just a minute, is how Venus is set up in the chart. But before I do that, let's talk about what Venus involves. Remember that Venus involves our values, folks. Not just money, but anything we value. Any object, any person. All of our values come from Venus. Venus's job is to tell us what we want. So if we look at Venus in Aquarius, what does Venus in Aquarius want? Well, Venus in Aquarius wants to be cutting edge. Venus in Aquarius wants to be unique. Venus in Aquarius seeks out people who are different, weird, quirky, nerdy. You get the picture, okay? They are not looking for the run-of-the-mill person. They're looking for someone who is interesting. That's what Venus in Aquarius desires. The challenge with Venus in Aquarius can be that in relationships, Venus in Aquarius folks often look for the broken people, the people who are, to not put too fine a point on it, like the misfits, the people that society says, you're too weird for me. In a relationship, that can be a problem because sometimes people with Venus in Aquarius believe that their love can help fix somebody. And so oftentimes they end up cycling from one broken person to the next broken person to the next broken person simply because those people that the Venus person is selecting, because they're different. Okay, because no one else is interested in them, or so it seems. Okay, so with Venus in Aquarius, we're dealing with someone who's looking to be on the cutting edge, looking to be progressive, looking to be different. And of course, Aquarius is a sign that often comes up for people who are big money people as well. As I mentioned, we have Venus in the second house. Venus in the second house is a common placement for wealth. Okay? And we have all of that. But in addition to all of that, Venus has no connections to anything in the chart. So, like the sun, Venus is also unaspected. It does not have any conjunctions, trines, sextiles, oppositions, or squares in this chart. Venus unaspected can bring the status of Venus even higher. As I said, we already have it in the second house, which is great for wealth. It is the only air planet in the chart, which again, in some ways is good because it means that she's going to look at love and relationships as well as money objectively. But it's the only air planet and it's unaspected. So again, as an astrologer, you take a really close look at that. And of course, Venus and singing go hand in hand. Okay? Venus is the planet that deals with our artistry and creativity. Okay. So let's quickly recap a little bit about what we've talked about so far, and I want to point this out just so you can see how good an astrological hand Miss Swift was dealt. Okay? So, we have Pluto in rulership. We have Mars in rulership. We have the Moon in rulership. We have Jupiter exalted. We have the Sun, which is a singleton, and it's also unaspected. We have Venus, which is a singleton, and it's also unaspected. There is a lot going on here, folks, and it's good. I mean, generally speaking, this is a great chart to have. I know a lot of people would trade for it. Now, of course, in my old astrology college, we used to joke that we loved our chart because, you know, sometimes your own chart is a challenge, and of course, we all have to work with them as our life goes along. But to start off with a chart like this is pretty damn nice. It has a lot of positive qualities to it. Okay, so let's see what else we're talking about in her chart. I think it's important for us to talk about Saturn in Capricorn next. Saturn, as we've said before, is the foil to Jupiter. Saturn, as I call him, the VP of accounting, almost never says yes. But when he does, it's a really good thing. Saturn in Capricorn is extremely serious about what they do. They put in the time and effort. Saturn in Capricorn is very ambitious, very traditional, and it can be really excellent at achieving long-term goals because it just keeps going. Saturn says you can do better. You can do better. Saturn's also the planet of karma, folks. So the more effort you put in, the more good karma you're going to get back. Let's not forget that either. However, Saturn, as I've said before, is kind of a wet blanket. A lot of people think of him as kind of a jerk, and he can be. Remember, this is the Grim Reaper, folks. This is the guy they made the Grim Reaper out of, okay? Saturn and Capricorn's downfalls include being too serious, and medically speaking, in the astrological world, Saturn is the planet of depression. Okay, so I would not be surprised at all if Taylor Swift had dealt with depression at some point in her life, also because of its placement in the second house of emotional security. Okay, and to top it all off, we also have Saturn in rulership. Once again, we have another planet in its strongest sign. I want to be clear, not the best, it's the most powerful. Depends on how you're living the chart. But I am sure that Taylor Swift has a very good command of what she is worth and what she is doing with it. Saturn in Capricorn is the ultimate in financial planning ability. And especially in the second house, this is somebody who's going to want to make sure that they will be in good financial shape their entire life. And based on what I understand, Taylor Swift has made incredibly good business decisions over her career and continues to do so, which is why I'm interested to see how she deals with this lawsuit. But again, that aside, we have somebody who has quite a few amazing planets here. Another planet that we definitely have to talk about tonight is Neptune. Now, we talked about Neptune in Alicia Liu's chart and how it deals with things that are artistic or creative. And, of course, that doesn't change for Ms. Swift. She's got Neptune in Capricorn as well. Now again, Neptune does not move very much. It's considered a generational planet. But I want you to look at where it's placed in the chart. It is connected to that very powerful Saturn. It's connected to Mercury. And it's also connected to Uranus, which we haven't talked about yet. So it's conjunct all of those as we look across the way. It is also connected to that Jupiter by opposition. Okay. Now, it's a little out of range for me to call the moon connected to Neptune. For me, that's a little bit more, that's a little bit too far for me. Normally, I consider a range of 7 degrees with Neptune at 11 and Cancer and the moon in Cancer at 1 Cancer. To me, that's not an opposition. So the moon's out. But again, what do we have? Well, we have one planet that's connected to 4 others. So we have 50% of the planets involved in this cluster. Again, in the second house. Okay. Now, again, there are some astrologers who will say that they would include the moon as part of this because the moon is conjunct Jupiter. Depends on who you ask. Okay, so potentially 6 out of the 10 planets. Neptune is about sensitivity. Neptune is the traditional planet of music. Neptune is connected to all of these planets. One interesting fact that you should know is that when you have Saturn and Neptune right next to each other, or connected in some way, in my case, Saturn and Neptune are opposed. Okay, but if you have them connected like this, this can make creative work difficult, and I'm going to explain why. Neptune wants to create, and Saturn is not satisfied easily. I remember when I wrote my first book, I had a lot of trouble getting words on the page because Saturn would continually say, it's not good enough, nobody's going to like it, nobody would even buy it. And so that Saturn inner editor comes out often. And I am sure for her that as she's doing any kind of creative work, especially songwriting, with Neptune there and Saturn right next door, she may struggle quite a bit with that. It may be that she gets to be almost a little bit perfectionistic about how she writes songs because Saturn will come in and say that he doesn't like it, or that people won't like it. Okay, but when you see Saturn and Neptune together, the way to make it work is for them to work in two different times. So there should be times for creation and then times for editing, polishing, proofing. If you can do that, then you can make Neptune and Saturn conjunct, or opposite in my case, work for you. But it can be very challenging to work with. And of course, with Neptune, the planet of inspiration, well, where is she inspired? Well, she's inspired to write stuff. She's inspired to talk about things. She's inspired to tell her stories. That's Neptune conjunct Mercury right there. Okay? But Neptune is incredibly important in the chart of any singer, but in this case, it is well integrated into the chart. Again, not like the Sun, completely unaspected, not like Venus, completely unaspected, but connected to, again, depending on how you look at it, 4 or 5 planets in the chart and sitting in the second house, which means that music is an area where she could potentially make money. Duh, right? We've definitely seen it in her life. Now, we also don't want to forget Uranus. Uranus in the second house in Capricorn. Now, Uranus has an 84-year cycle. So it changes signs about once every 7 years. And Uranus hadn't been in Uranus hadn't been in Capricorn for too long when Taylor Swift was born. And Uranus is the planet, I call it the planet that breaks stuff. I also call it the planet of Red Bull because it's often very electric. Okay, it's energy. It's ideas that come out of nowhere. It's being inspired by things that are crazy. It's unconventional energy. It's right next to Mercury. So this is a person whose mind likely never stops. Her mind is probably always working. She's always thinking about different things she can write, different ways she can communicate. Okay? And Uranus next to that Mercury is going to give her an edge in any communicative activity. And you can see even in society, when it comes to her not singing, when she's just being her, she attracts so much attention. She walks into a room and it's electric. That's what you get when you have someone who has a Mercury and Uranus placement. Someone who communicates, gets a lot of attention. What's also interesting is that Uranus is the internet. And so with Mercury connected to Uranus in this chart in the second house, it would also be possible for her to be very well known, make money, be very solid via the internet as well, which of course, as you know, she is. She's become very much an internet presence. Okay, we would expect that from someone with Mercury-Uranus conjunct. So let's talk about a few other things before we end our stream for tonight, because we're getting close to the end. Let's look at our nodes So we're going to look at the North Node in Aquarius in the third house. The North Node is where we are trying to go in life, the area that we need to develop so we can become more well-rounded, solid individuals. Aquarius, once again, we go back to this idea of being different, being progressive, being cutting edge. And in what area of your life would you expect this to happen? Well, the third house. The third house of communication. The third house of writing. The third house of communicating of any kind. Okay? And what is also really interesting is that the third house deals with anything involving our brothers and sisters and our local neighborhood. Okay? And I actually do know a little something about Taylor Swift's neighborhood. She lived in an area of Reading, Pennsylvania called Wyomissing. My wife was born not too far from there and lived not far from there, so I actually know that area very well. And so that is where she started to gain her popularity. And what's interesting is that the third house also represents K through 12 education. And that's when she really started working on being a singer and getting more popular. She did a lot of things when she was in primary school and high school. But this is an area that she's supposed to develop. She's supposed to be writing. And I'm guessing that as time goes on, she'll be more and more known for her writing as well as her singing. Because we know that she's a prolific songwriter. But we always look to the North Node to try to figure out what areas of life we are supposed to be developing. And we look at the North Node by sign and house, as you saw. So as we kind of start to wrap up looking at this chart, obviously there is so much more that we could say. We could look at transits. Again, she was sued today. I don't have the today's chart with me available right now to put it up here. But what I can tell you is that if you have a chart like this, it is really easy for you to be a success. I am not taking anything away from Taylor Swift. She has worked very hard and continues to do so. But having a chart set up like this certainly doesn't hurt. Okay? It is a wonderful, wonderful chart. It has so many powerful planets to work with. It really is it seems almost too easy. Like I said, I know she's worked very hard and I don't want to take that away from her. But again, it's easy to be successful when you've got a chart that looks like this. Okay? So for anyone who is on the channel now, on the stream, I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I am thrilled and thankful that you are here to see the Twitch stream. Oh, Pluto in the 12th, Cozy Curls. Let's talk about that. So, Pluto in the 12th, to me, I would say that it's presenting her life, in her life. I think that has to do with the fact that Scorpio power for her is not necessarily something that she has to bring out. In other words, when you have Pluto in the 12th like that, and especially in Scorpio, you feel it. You can be around someone and feel it. In other words, she has so many good things going on in the chart, including that very powerful Pluto, But because it's powerful, I don't believe she has to do a lot to push. I think she shows up, and given the rest of her chart, people want to work with her. They want to see her be successful. However, again, this is not a person that I would trifle with. I would say this person is very, very strong. And if pushed into a position where you would try to take her power away, I think that would be a big mistake. But I really think it is this subtle power that she almost doesn't even have to use. Most of the time, I don't even think she has to access it. But it's there and it's palpable and people feel it. That's really what I think about when I think about Pluto and Scorpio in the 12th. I also would wonder, though, about her spiritual path, because there's so much going on in the 12th house involving spirituality. I don't know much about her in that area, but likely when it comes to her spiritual code, whatever that is, likely that's very strong. Great question, Cozy Curls. Thank you so much for asking that. Okay. Well, it doesn't appear that there are any other questions. Once again, I'm thrilled that you could join us tonight. And next week, we are going to be doing the chart of actress Ali Larter. And the reason we're going to be doing that is because I have a client who asked to do her chart specifically. This client actually shares Ali Larter's birthday, date and year. So this is someone who she's looking at and saying, how much is this person like me? She's very interested in that chart. So again, next week we're going to be doing the chart of actress Ali Larter. I look forward to seeing you again then, and hope that if you have any questions at all about this chart, or you're interested in a consultation, you'll look me up. You're also going to find that the chart of Alicia Liu is coming out now in pieces. So please feel free to take a look at those. Those are going to be on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, TikTok. All right, everybody. Thanks so much again for joining us. I look forward to seeing you next week for Ali Larter. Have a great week.